there needs to be a dose of realism about like how DC actually functions today and what it takes, to successfully operate in that context. The reason that I love the Mirrors for Princes tradition and the reason I put together this book is like, it is not a theoretical book. This is a manual, for an embattled statesman. Very practical. It connects the whole world of theory to action. So like any contemporary political leader or aspiring one can open this up, and there are concrete nuggets of wisdom and applications that both play to their self-interest, but also to hopefully, other good and classical virtues.
Is Donald Trump a statesman? Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and I'm joined by
Nick Solheim, the COO of American Moment.
Our third episode of the season and 3 episodes where we tape together. We have a fantastic episode for you guys today. Something a little bit different, but certainly a lot of fun. We had on our friend, the president and CEO of ISI, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, Johnny Burtka, on to talk about his new book. But before I get to that, be sure, as always, to go to AmericanMoment.org. There you can find the backlog of this podcast and everything else we have cooking. Summer fellowship applications are closed, but I'm sure you can sign up for a wait list for the fall fellowship. We're doing this year round now. You can sign up for AM Fridays. This is our lecture series on Capitol Hill that we're doing from February 22nd to, I believe, May 3rd. 10 lunches in the Russell Senate Office building, Chick-fil-A catered, on the basics of how to think about the world the way we do. Fantastic speakers ranging from Elbridge Colby to Russ Vogt to Stephen Miller and many, many others talking about all of the issues that matter. Our gala for American Statecraft is coming up. You can go to AmericanMoment.org/gala or Gala Statecraft or StatecraftGala.org. That's the other URL. And you can buy tickets to help support us. We have David Sachs and JD Vance speaking that night. David will be presented with the Third Rail Award for Public Courage. Highly encourage you guys to check that out. But going to the episode that we have today, we had on John A. Burtka IV, or Johnny, as we know him, who's the president and CEO of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. He graduated from Hillsdale College with degrees in French and Christian studies, and earned a graduate degree in theology from La Faculté Jean Calvin in Aix-en-Provence. I don't know. He began his career at ISI, where he served as a development officer, and he returned to ISI after 4 years as the American Conservative Magazine's executive director and acting editor. He's appeared on Fox News and Fox Business and written for the Washington Post, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, First Things, the American Mind, and the Intercollegiate Review, among other publications. He has been a Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute and has participated in academic fellowships at Washington College and the Trinity Forum. He lives in Pennsylvania with his fantastic wife, Amanda, who we love as well. His new book is Statesmanship, Selections from Xenophon to Churchill. The foreword is by Larry Arnn. We had a fun episode basically overviewing letters to princes from a time immemorial, whether it's an obscure bureaucrat in Han China 3,000 years ago to more contemporary examples like Cicero. Johnny has basically gone across the world and across the last 4,000 years of human history to find examples of the best advice that is given to great statesmen from people who do the thinking for them. And so we had a really fun time needling him about, well, is FDR a good statesman? And, all the hard examples, the stuff that the president of ISI probably doesn't want to be talking about. But we had a fantastic time. I highly encourage you guys to listen to the episode. And I'll be honest, after the episode, I want to dive deeper into the book as well. So it was absolutely fantastic. I don't know what you thought about it, Nick.
Yeah, it was a very good ad for the book, for sure. It was like, listening to this, it's like, okay, man, a bunch of people should buy this. So we greatly enjoyed the episode. Johnny was commenting that we really put him on the hot seat about particular people from not just American history, but Western history. So very, very enjoyable conversation, and a lot of fun tidbits in the bonus section for subscribers only.
Absolutely. So if you would like to subscribe, go to YouTube. We spend a lot of money on this. You get the episode 24 hours early, so you can watch it on Sunday, and you get the special subscribers only section. That's 10 to 20 minutes of some really juicy stuff that we don't put publicly. This time it was who the most overrated statesman is, what must be done with the ISI Tweed Bros. What did you ask him?
I asked him about the conservative media ghetto.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So really taking names and talking SHIT. So we had a really good time. There's 2 levels. There's Truthers, and especially relevant for this episode, Statesman. And so go and subscribe, support our content on YouTube. We're on season 4 of this. We've done literally over 130 episodes. Many of you are very religious listeners to this show, so show your support by subscribing. We'll go now to Johnny Burtka. Johnny, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We always like to hear about how our guests got to where they are today. You are astonishingly young to be running such an august organization. Tell us that story. How does one do it? A lot of our guests are young and would also like to be running important things one day.
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough to have entrepreneurs for parents. So my parents actually quit their day jobs and started a winery when I was about 12 years old. So they basically sold everything, purchased a plot of land, planted the grapes. So I was out there as a 12-year-old,
Where was this?
Digging the dirt. This was in South Central Michigan.
Not a place that I think of.
Not a place.
Wine.
No. And now there's probably over, 40 wineries in the state of Michigan. So it's really boomed, in the last 20 years. But then they were pioneers. So I got experience from a young age working behind I think I was 14 years old, like pouring samples for people at the winery. So, a lot of, I think the practical, just leadership skills or organization skills, I really got drilled into me helping my parents manage what turned into 2 wineries, a brewery, and several restaurants. So, from there,
all in Michigan?
All in Michigan. Yeah. Yep. I went to a local public high school, Hanover Horton, very proud of Hanover Horton Comets. And actually, when it came time to go to college, a family friend, twisted my arm to visit Hillsdale. I really didn't want anything to do with going to Hillsdale.
Why? Because it was nearby, or?
Well, it was nearby, and my heart was set on going to the University of Michigan.
Yeah.
So I had season tickets to Michigan football from the time I was 7 years old. That was like, I actually remember laying in bed at night as a 7-year-old thinking, like, there's nothing I love more in the world than the Michigan Wolverines. Yeah. And so that was my destiny, and that it was interrupted by a lecture on Abraham Lincoln that I heard at Hillsdale College. And then I kept just going back for more. I sat in on classes, and I remember
you were like, I would like 4 years of lectures on Abraham Lincoln.
I would like give me 4 years of it. And I actually remember sitting in on this lecture with Dr. Westblade. It was a religion lecture, and then afterwards, my dad and I talking to him. My dad saying, what on earth is Johnny going to do with this liberal arts degree from Hillsdale? And he said, John, why don't you go home and look at the company you're currently working for? This was, I think, before he had opened all of the wineries. And he said, look at the C-suite and see what their undergraduate degree was. And it turns out at the time, I don't know if this is still true today at many companies, they all basically had humanities undergraduates before they ended up going and getting their MBAs. And so, got a great scholarship to Hillsdale, and that ended up really changing the whole trajectory of my life.
What was your first interaction with Larry Arnn, and how has that since influenced the way that you've operated in life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it was like most students, he always had lunch in the cafeteria. And so if you were fortunate enough to have him sit at your table, your lunch conversation would shift.
And to be clear, he just plops down wherever, right? And starts
wherever he wants, and then just starts holding court, asking questions about Aristotle, interrogating different students. So that was probably the first interaction. But then the more formative one was my senior year, and I took 2 classes with him. So I had an Aristotle class that was just an entire semester on only the Nicomachean Ethics. And then the second semester was C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man and That Hideous Strength. And we read those together. So from there, he's been basically a mentor of mine.
Yeah. What did you end up doing after college?
So after college, I went to France, and I attended a French seminary. So I was actually Reformed Protestant at the time. So it was the La Faculté Jean Calvin in Aix-en-Provence. And I did essentially an MDiv equivalent. I thought I wanted to be a pastor, so that was my track. By the end of it, I was no longer a Calvinist.
Dang.
But I did do a year after that, a year-long fellowship with the Trinity Forum. They used to have this program out on the eastern shore of Maryland where 6 guys and 6 girls lived in a house. It's kind of like Real World. And it was right on the Chesapeake Bay. And then every week they'd bring in different speakers. And so Josh Mitchell was one of the frequent lecturers there. By the end of that, I had spent the year studying early Christian liturgical texts and decided I wanted to become Eastern Orthodox. And so I basically put all of the, pastoral aspirations to the side and reached back out to Larry Arnn and said, I want to get involved in politics. So I just applied, I slept on couches in DC. I tried to get coffee with everyone I could. I applied for a dozen jobs and ISI was the one that, gave me the interview. And so I started with ISI in 2014. I did fundraising. Then I left for 4 years to run the American Conservative magazine, and now I've been back as president for 3.5 years at ISI.
That's awesome. It's a very interesting story, and the book you've written, I think, is almost perfectly suited to the job you have, and I'm sure that was partially why you wrote it. Tell us a little bit about the book. What was the formative thought process that led to you deciding to put in the enormous effort to actually get pen to paper?
Absolutely. So, looking at our contemporary American political culture, lots of people perpetually complain about America's leaders, especially Congress. I mean, the approval rating in Congress is like 20%. It's totally in the gutter. And for all the complaining, if you look at, let's say, the business sector, there are a million self-help books, Jim Collins' Good to Great, Peter Thiel 0 to 1 on how to be the next Steve Jobs, how to build a unicorn company. And literally nothing comparable exists for statesmen, aspiring statesmen or current statesmen. So I just found it, a bit ironic. And I saw this void that if we're going to complain about our political leaders, shouldn't we actually have a bar, set the standard for the type of conduct that we want to see from them, and then actually create the institutions of learning that are necessary to raise and train them up. And so the Mirrors for Princes genre is essentially, these are self-help books for political leaders. They existed in every culture and civilization known to mankind, going all the way back to antiquity. I mean, China, India, Greece, Rome, all the way throughout Byzantium, the Middle Ages. And then they had a flowering in the Renaissance. And then the genre just totally disappeared in the modern era. And so
did that have something to do with the creation of the franchise?
Sorry, the franchise.
Like, did voting coming around as a concept lead to? Yeah,
I see what you're saying. I think so, yes. Yeah. So I think there's really three reasons. Yeah. The first is the shift from monarchies to representative forms of government. But I actually think it's easy, perhaps a little bit easier when you know who the young prince is or who the king or queen's going to be, to write them a letter and hand deliver it and basically use it as a way to offer your services either as a tutor or a counselor. But there's no reason we couldn't reappropriate the genre for presidents or senators or governors today. And then I think there's really two other reasons.
Well, people are resentful, though, right? Because that would imply that you know who those people are going to be 20 years ahead of time.
Sure. Well, that's true. So some of those, some of them were given as gifts to the young prince, right? When you knew who they were going to be. But many of these were also given to, it was at the coronation, right? They were given as gifts to kings and queens there. I think the two other factors at the beginning of the progressive era, there was a shift away from statesmanship, classically understood, in favor of management and expertise. There was, people became uncomfortable with the idea of, a great-souled statesman, with his or her hand on the rudder of the ship of state, navigating it through tumultuous waters and unpredictable winds. And, people felt more comfortable with the scientific, bureaucratic approach to statesmanship. And then I think the last thing is the contemporary university system just stopped teaching these classic texts because they're guilty of what C.S. Lewis described as presentism. Basically, if it wasn't written in the last 10 minutes, then it's not really worth their time.
So why do you think that is that the, let's just call it like the American people focus on that instead of like the West as a whole, started focusing more on like middle managers basically to lead the country as opposed to like great men?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Obviously, I think it was part and parcel of the wider, obviously the progressive movement had some origins in sort of the German university system and model. And I think that approach just favored kind of management expertise, a permanent bureaucracy. And so a lot of that was just imported. I think some of it also has to do with business culture in the United States. Some these businesses, kind of, if you think like coming out of the Gilded Age, were just such behemoths that, in order to run them, they had to be run more like, kingdoms, and massive bureaucratic organizations. And so people, learned that bureaucratic approach in business, and I think it bled over into political life too.
Do you think that, with the, and you don't need to give away the book too much, people that listen to this show should buy it, but do you think that with the election of Trump that people are kind of moving away from that now? They're less interested in being under bureaucratic management?
Well, I think people have seen bureaucratic management for what it is. The veil has been lifted. And for a long time in American history, I actually think there was, a fairly strong amount of faith in, and even pride in, I think if you described it as bureaucracy, people probably wouldn't be proud of that, but I think generally if people, I'm not saying conservatives, but if you just have your average American is looking back at, like, let's say the New Deal, or baby boomers looking at LBJ's kind of legacy, the Great Society programs, I think there's a general sense of like, there were good intentions and like it made a difference. And this is sort of like part of the American fabric. But I think over time, the interests of the permanent class in Washington, D.C. really divorced itself from the interests of the American people. And, I think the election of Donald Trump was really sort of a wake-up call to, basically, it was the American people kind of standing up and saying, we actually see this bureaucracy for what it is, and we're ready for a radical change.
So I want to come back to some of the contemporary political implications of this a little bit later. But before that, talking about why this kind of writing has gone away, would it be accurate to say that part of the reason is that the process of electing leaders became a substitute for the more classical qualifications of great rulers? Like, because you got elected, therefore you have everything you need to rule, became the shorthand, as opposed to in hereditary monarchies, like, you were going to rule and this was to make you a better one, one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something, I think twofold, just basically about the election process. One of it is, so much of our whole American political system is actually focused on getting elected and not actually governing once you're elected. If you think of the whole kind of the whole pageantry around presidential elections, like, all the nostalgia, or even all the political reporters who kind of geek out on all this sort of old historic election kind of, horse trading, like, they're really telling stories about the campaign, the great political campaigns. And then that's where all the money is, right? And then once you get elected, then it's sort of the boring job of you've conquered. Sort of winning the election is kind of the ancient equivalent of being a conqueror, and then the ruling part, is the boring part. That it's sort of like, that doesn't really matter. Like, we've already kind of won the victory.
So in conservative circles in the United States, we talk a lot about Western civilization, and I have my issues with it because I think people substitute that for like good things, like good things equals Western civilization. But I remember months and months ago when we were first talking about this book that you were working on, you were particularly excited about some of the more like esoteric non-Western examples of great statesmanship. Tell us about some of those. I want to get a little bit more color on what else you found other than, the obvious stuff in Greece and Rome and Renaissance Europe and things like that. Yeah.
So I think the three, let's say four that I really liked. One was Han Fei's The Art of Persuasion. So Han Fei was an ancient Chinese legalist. He was really, I would say, a proto-Machiavelli. So he was a total realist in his outlook of the world.
What era would he have been around?
I should know this exactly.
Even what millennium,
I think it was like
would be
10th
helpful.
or 11th century
Got it.
BC.
Okay, so right around turn of the millennium.
And
BC. Okay,
yeah.
So
like going
3,000 years ago.
Yeah. And so, he has the advice is brutal. I mean, he literally doesn't. He's totally amoral in how he's assessing politics. But there are even differences in how he approaches or recommend leaders approach management. So one example is he thinks the political ruler should not be a prominent public-facing figure, that the political ruler needs to be hiding himself constantly, and especially keep his desires hidden from his own ministers. So he advises the leader to never tell your closest ministers what you actually think. So you basically, bring them all into the room, you give them the problem you want them to solve, and then they come back and report to you, and you're totally impassible. You don't let on, and you hear all of the proposals. Because he says if you signal what you would like to hear, they're all going to tailor their advice to what they think you want to hear.
Interesting.
The other thing he says is if you're evaluating performance reviews in the ancient Han dynasty, basically he lets each minister pick like the target, their KPIs. You define your KPI. But what happens is when they come back and report on how they did, if they fall short of their KPIs, he punishes them. If they exceed their KPIs, he punishes them. Because he says, if you fall short, then you kind of just suck. You're not good as good as you think you are. But if you exceed it, he's like, then you set the goal intentionally too low and you were unaware of your capabilities, or you're trying to trick me. So that's the kind of advice you'll encounter. But the selection I included really goes into the art of persuasion. It's really sort of a crash course in rhetoric and how do you win people over to your position. Shifting, making our way from east to west. There's an ancient Indian text written by Kautilya. And so this text really focuses a lot on two things. One is restraint. So the first one, a good ruler ought to have control of their passions, right? Not be given to gluttony, or to sort of any other kind of typical vices associated with the passions. Thought that was very fundamental for ruling. That's how the book starts out. But then it really focuses in on personnel and, how personnel, the whole success of your political operation depends on persennel, which dovetails very well.
Indians who care a lot about personnel. Why would you say such a thing?
Then as we kind of continue to work our way over, you get to a text in Byzantium that I like. So this was written in the 6th century AD. This was Agapetus the deacon's letters to Justinian the Great. So these are essentially proverbial wisdom that was written to Emperor Justinian, and who was ultimately known for building the Hagia Sophia and then writing the Justinianic legal code. The Code of Justinian basically still shapes kind of European law to this day. And that advice actually is very anti-elite, which is interesting. So I think a lot of times when you think back, or when we contemporary Americans think back to these historic monarchies or, empires, we often think, okay, the king just sort of hangs out with the aristocrats. They go hunting. Like it's sort of this cabal against the people. That's not at all how Justinian approached it, or Agapetus. For him, it was that, there's this sort of unshakable bond between the common people and the emperor. And it's the emperor's job to actually be a scourge in the elite aristocratic classes and to be the one that really disciplines and checks them, and who actually rises above dueling aristocratic factions and sort of orders the whole polity, sort of embodies the people, not just represents them, but like literally embodies them and sort of brings them before, God and sort of more ultimate aims. And then the last one I'll mention is El-Farabi's Aphorisms of a Statesman. So this is the Islamic text. He lived in Syria. I believe it was 7th, 8th century AD. And here it's interesting. Again, it's written in the form of proverbial wisdom, but his whole point is that, it's the physician or doctor who cures bodies. It's the statesman who cures souls. So there's a strong element of soulcraft. And he essentially unpacks what that looks like in Islamic context.
Did he imply in that any relationship or tension between the statesman taking on that responsibility versus organized faith? In his case, it would have been Islam taking on that responsibility. And across the board, what's the tension you've seen between how statesmen think of their role versus the faith in whatever society they find themselves in?
Yeah, I think it might help if I just kind of address it more broadly than in the particular context of El-Farabi, because I don't know all the ins and outs of I don't know the Islamic kind of political system as well as I do the kind of the pagan classical and the Christian one. So in the classical world, I mean, if you're going back to ancient Egypt or Greece or Mesopotamia, you basically the monarch was a quasi divine figure. I mean, in the case of like Egypt, they were considered to be a god kings, right? So that was sort of the ancient understanding of politics, is basically like the king is sort of a linchpin between the whole the world of the gods, and the world of mankind, and kind of linked it together. And really and this is even in ancient China, the sort of the temple where the king or the emperor performed their rituals. It was really this mediating of these two worlds together. This is not exactly the picture of kingship in ancient Israel, right? Obviously, there is one God, it's Yahweh, and the king is a lawgiver. King David wrote the Psalms. Like, there is a big role to play for the state in terms of the religious functions, but the priesthood is also a separate thing. So I would say it's more of a symbiotic relationship in ancient Israel. Then you have throughout the let's say the first 1,000 years of church history, you kind of have, with the Byzantine Empire, they largely pick up with Constantine and Justinian kind of the Roman imperial understanding. And so kind of the model of politics and religion is one of symphonia, where these two powers, it's basically like they're, kind of one of them's the heart, the other one's the soul. They work together. They're sort of integrated in a coherent whole. That doesn't mean there aren't tensions, though, right? At one point, Justinian literally kidnaps the Pope and holds him hostage for years until he changes his theological opinion on something. So no one actually really thinks that that's a good way to go about the interaction of politics and religion. But that is kind of the ideal during that period of symphony is sort of interrupted by these abuses and the charges of like Caesaropapism. But then in the West, then you see a real shift really after the Great Schism. So this is like 11th and 12th century. Up into that point in time, the coronation of monarchs was basically seen as a sacrament in the church. So it was very much kind of there was a sacral quality, even like a priestly quality that was associated with political rulers. The Catholic Church, I don't think many people know this, actually desacralized the monarchy in large part to elevate the power of the papacy in temporal affairs. So there was almost a secularization of the temporal sphere and an elevation of the papal powers that ended up then, leading to some of the kind of a more strong division between the power of the church.
What century would that have happened?
That would have happened in the 12th century, basically the first 100 years sort of after the Great Schism. Now you can actually go back into the West and you can see, tracks, is in the 5th and 6th century that are talking about like these two distinct powers, the church and the state. And these are sort of two swords and they're separate and neither one should dominate the other. So I would say that in the West, even going back to Augustine and earlier, you do see kind of a more clear division and distinction between the two than you do see in the East. But then throughout the you have different relationships, and Nick could probably talk, and others could talk with greater detail about the relationship between the papacy and various monarchs, and then the relationship between, after the Reformation, the various Protestant princes and their
Nick, could you temporal?
Sure. Putting me on the spot.
So anyways, that's kind of, there's a lot more that could be explored there. But
So as another sort of broad framing question, recognizing that such things are kind of contrived a little bit, like, do you feel like, having surveyed the landscape of, the classical models of statesmanship in each of these civilizations, you can draw a through line to the way they're governed today? Like, when you look at ancient Chinese statesmanship's wisdom, do you see analogs to how the CCP is run today? Do you see analogs in how India is run today? In the West, I mean, I assume part of the drive for this book is you don't see it as much in the West as you'd like to. But tell me a little bit about, like, having grappled with, the status quo ante here, how it changes your view of the differences between these cultures and how they're governed today.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of what I wanted to do with this book is I think that contemporary, diplomats, statesmen, they do have a very, it's sort of a McKinsey-esque management consulting approach to diplomacy and statesmanship. They see everything, they have basically their caseload, and on their caseload there are problem sets, and they're just working through it in a very Western rational way. And I think the great thing about this tradition is it shows the profound role of religion, but also kind of traditional cultures in their understanding of politics. And I think that should have more of an emphasis today. As you go into these different texts and you're trying to link to the present day, but part of me is hesitant to say, like, I've included this text on, from ancient China, 3,000 years ago, and it's definitive for like how China like exercises power today. But I would say that there is certainly so I guess one thing with the CCP, the idea of sort of an individual mattering, and meaning something and being sort of immense value as an individual is totally non-existent, right? They really do have a pure kind of collective focus for all of their policy decisions. And if that means that 100,000 people, several million people have to die here or there, it's just purely like a rational kind of calculation.
The wall has to be built. Sorry. So in that sense, that sort of just cold realism, pragmatism is fully on display in Hanfei, and you see it today in China. And so I'm sure that you could draw similar threads for, the way the Islamic world approaches religion and politics. Like Al-Farabi makes sense, if you're looking at the Islamic world today. I think there's a lot of parallels that could be drawn. So in that case, then, if you're taking the long view of history here, I mean, you've mentioned 4,000 year range of time between these different statesmen. Is there anything new under the sun? Have every people's basically like reinvented the same thematic concerns for statesmen in just different eras and different places?
So my reading of history is that there is nothing new under the sun.
Ecclesiastes was correct. Yeah. Okay.
Ecclesiastes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Controversial.
Which is actually funny because if so it's very simply put in Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
But political philosophers, I think, like to I even just described these different periods and how things changed a bit in these periods. But I don't know. There's a sense in which they often kind of make claims, as though human nature has changed in these different eras, and people are looking for different things in politics today.
Or even the novelty of discovery, like human nature could be the same, but we have now said something that has never been said before about it, which doesn't seem to be an evidence based on what you're saying. Yeah,
or there's a new science of politics, and then you see that in the progressive era, and to me it's just actually I think human beings are pretty much always like they've been, right? And they want certain fundamental things from their government, and I think great leaders always embody the same qualities. And I would say even pretty much regardless of the regime type, I think the general qualities of a great leader are pretty consistent.
Yeah,
I think it's really funny that you wanted to fact check the Bible.
I did not want to fact check the Bible.
Is there anything new under the sun?
That was the joke I was making. Ecclesiastes 1:9, what has been will be again. There is nothing new under the sun. It's like the Bible verse I've memorized. And so
I didn't know you were allowed to read that.
Yeah, whatever. Okay. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Who is a political leader in American history that you don't like, that you think embodied the classical statesmanly virtues?
Thomas Jefferson.
Nice.
That's okay. Let me ask this another way, because I was fishing for one answer in particular. Was FDR a great statesman?
That's an interesting question. I think if you're, I think the answer is yes. If you're looking at American history, and you're, because I think there's a number of. And that's not to say that all of the programs that he implemented were good ideas or didn't have harmful effects. I think, great leaders, I mean, someone like FDR won 4 presidential elections, right? He was faced domestically with the Great Depression, and then he also had World War II, right? So these are sort of probably the two greatest, an internal and external challenge, with the exception of the Civil War and maybe like the founding itself. That have ever faced the regime. And I think if you're just sort of broadly looking at did he sort of, lead America out of the Great Depression through victory in the Second World War? I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think if you look at people like Churchill, like someone like Churchill had immense respect for FDR as a leader. So I think I don't think there should be and I think any American in the 20th century, like if you were just to go back and ask like my grandparents, like who were as, very conservative Catholics, grew up in, Polish kind of immigrant communities outside of Detroit, if you were to ask them, and they're totally outside of this DC bubble or conservative bubble, like was FDR a good leader, a great American? They would say like, absolutely. Like they would say like, there's probably nothing more American. It's like apple pie, FDR, right? Again, that's not to say that we should imitate he was also a very proud individual and also an individual who had, immense vices in his own personal life. And I think the heavily kind of bureaucratic, because even if we're comparing the administrative state today versus the administrative state of FDR, like it was much more skinny then, right? And it was almost entirely accountable to him as president. In a way that
Brother Curtis calls him Blue Caesar, like he.
And so in a way that today it's just not the same with the administrative state.
I'm going to put you on the spot and ask the inverse.
Okay.
Who had the most success and was the worst statesman?
In American history or just
in American history?
In American history, yeah.
Who had the most success and was the worst statesman?
Who got the luckiest with the least beneficial qualities undergirding?
Who had the most success but was the worst statesman?
Did you have an idea for like in all history? Did someone pop into mind?
Let's see. I'm just kind of thinking through the figures that I've featured or profiled in the book. Well, to me, I guess it's those two things sort of stand in contradiction.
Yeah.
Because I would say I often judge a statesman by their successes, right? Like that to me, that's
so that's interesting. So then let's dive into that. Like, what do great statesmen necessarily succeed? Is I guess the logical question, or can statesmen only be judged by their fruits?
So I think that's sort of a Machiavelli point about, basically like a statesman will be judged correct or triumphant, like if they accomplish the means that they set out. And if they fail, like, they're basically going to be forgotten. I think he's even talking about the means that they use to accomplish their goals will be deemed just if they're successful. But if they're not successful, they'll be punished, right? Or thrown into prison. So I think that, if you think of like a George Washington, so there's this interplay. Like, I don't think even in a democratic society, you don't really get to pick your leaders. Like, and what I mean is that great leaders are emergent.
Sure.
And there's this intersection of virtue on one hand and fortune on the other. And there's a lot of there's a lot of good humans, virtuous humans, even if like George Washington was born 10 years earlier or 10 years later. Like, we might not know his name. America might not exist as it is. There has to be this element of luck that you, Nick, kind of touched on a bit about where sort of the waves of fortune are coming. And if you go to Machiavelli, he's basically, towards the end of The Prince, talking about, does that mean you're just if you're a virtuous guy, but there's not a lot going on, are you just going to be forgotten by history? What do you do? And so he's kind of talking about this almost like an exercise of like, you're a surfer sort of out there. Yeah. He doesn't use the example of a surfer, but he's basically saying you're sort of waiting for these waves of fortune and you have to time sort of your own paddling along with the waves. Yeah. And so he mentions in particular that when fortune wants to make a prince great, she brings enemies before him and obstacles in his path. And basically every enemy, every obstacle is a ladder. And if those enemies or obstacles break the prince or the statesman, he's never going to be a great leader. But if he can climb them, that's the path to greatness.
Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking about here is like, take like dictators as an example, right? Can they be effective but still be like not good statesmen? So the first person to come to mind is like Huey Long. Was Huey Long a good statesman? He accomplished a lot in Louisiana, but seems like a pretty bad guy. You know, I'm kind of interested just in your thoughts on that in general.
Yeah, so I would first and foremost judge the statesmen by their accomplishments, by their effects. Like that's sort of my standard, and even that I think colored my FDR response, because in part I think the answer is like, did he accomplish what he set out to accomplish? Did he basically build an entire new paradigm that we're still living in today? And so to me, there's a greatness there, even though it's not entirely a goodness. Sure. With Huey Long, that one, so I read the Huey Long biography, I think that you had recommended. And it was one of those things where at first I was like, man, this is awesome. You know, and then this guy's a lot of fun.
By the end of it, to the kidnappings and stuff. And you're like,
by the end of it, I was just like, I just kind of want this guy to die. Like, he is just,
and then he dies.
And he dies. Right?
It's great.
It's like, because it's like he was, a demagogue in like, but when you actually saw how much corruption there was, and how, I mean, just some of the things that many of the things that he promised, it was the total inverse of the truth, but he was just so good at saying them and could fire people up. Like, I could imagine being in the crowd and just going crazy, but then in reality, it's just sort of like, there's nothing there. You know, there's no there.
Yeah, he'd be like, free textbooks for everyone, and they go, hooray, and they'd be like, sir, how are we going to do that? I don't know.
Like, and then not do it.
And then not do it at all.
Or he built all these roads, which in one sense was a great, he's a builder. So this is another thing. Great leaders are builders, like always builders. Built all these roads, but then a lot of them, like, a few years down the road, they all started crumbling, and there was all this debt. And like, he just didn't really care because it was all about his power.
Well, and then he was on to the Senate and all of that. There's still the Capitol that he built in Louisiana is still I think it's the tallest state capital in the nation.
Yeah.
And they still use it. Very, very interesting. And it was, I remember I read a couple books about Huey Long, and there were people in the swamp regions and stuff that were not, like, before they had television and that sort of thing, who, like, in the 50s and 60s, like, thought he was the president of the United States. Like, it was like, they just had no contact with the outside world. And they're like, yeah, surely that guy was president by now. It's very interesting to think about. Anyway.
So putting all these hard examples in front of you, I guess, leads to my question to wrap that part up, which is, is the statesman necessarily sort of coterminous with good things? Like that, as conservatives, we have certain political policy priorities, certain views of American history, certain views of world history, and, who were the good and the evil sides of it. In your reading of history through this angle, do you think that there is a moral valence to statesmanship, or is it a practical talent? Like, plenty of bad people and plenty of good people have been good at doing the statesmanship thing.
Yeah. So this is hard. Where I come down is that I think it is more a practical talent than reflection of moral virtue. And you see there's kind of a divergence in the tradition. For Cicero, in his book On Duties, for Erasmus, it really is like, there is this kind of belief that, like, if the statesman is a good man, right, then the effective governance, like, it's going to follow from there. So the whole hope is just, let us please get a good and godly man. I think, obviously we should hope, especially as, as Christians, like, for good and godly people in political leadership. But I think I'm more with, I think, Machiavelli. If you're just to me, like, being a good statesman is more akin to being a good NFL quarterback.
Yeah.
Like, does it help if they're, let's say, a Christian or conservative? Like, maybe like they're more disciplined, they're less likely to, like, give into pride or these other vices, and so maybe that helps them play better.
We're sort of orthogonal to those.
At the end of the day, they still need to be like 6'4" and like 240 and like really fast. Yeah. And like, so to me, it's statesmanship is the other aspect is in a more, I think, in a pre kind of democratic era, there are a lot of other trappings of the office. that kind of play that moral function, even if the individual isn't necessarily moral themselves. You know, the whole structure of, like monarchies, so it is sort of ordered around sort of pointing people up towards the transcendent and towards sort of like a sense of public virtue in a way that I don't think we have in our current system. It's just too individualistic today.
Yeah. What changes after the resurrection? You know, the advent of Christianity, what does it change about statesmanship? Because that seems like the hinge point in the eras you've been studying is like...
Well, the big change is like there are no more God kings, right?
Yeah.
Like Jesus is the God king, right? And he reigns, right? He reigns forever on his throne. And so ultimately, I think...
Even the greatest statesmen are taken down a peg.
They're all taken down a peg. So I think various earthly kingdoms, nations, empires, like they come and they go, right? And I think they can either, broadly, I think align their vision of human nature and of the world, like they can align it, in the same direction, with Christ and his reign, or they can resist it and go against it and do what they want. I think that's sort of an open invitation for every culture, for every nation to decide.
Yeah. Moving way forward, what, after having surveyed the classical data points essentially here, are you convinced is the biggest weakness of, let's say, to get super limited in scope, the modern Republican Party's median politician? Why are they not good statesmen based on what you've seen?
Well, I often think they just sort of live in an imaginary reality, right? It strikes me as though, they may have whatever. They read the Federalist Papers. They kind of have a basic understandings of the workings of the Constitution. But I think they think that government works like it did 200 years ago. And I don't think it really does, right? And so I think there's a dose of, that's not to say we need to jettison kind of the ancient ways or strive or not, that we should not strive to sort of recover kind of the best in our American constitutional tradition. Like the Constitution is the law, like that's the framework that we operate in. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a dose of realism about like how DC actually functions today and what it takes, to successfully operate in that context. And I know that's, again, kind of getting back to your staffing point of making sure, especially on the executive side, that administrations have the talent they need to like pull the levers that exist in our current regime, not just the one that existed in 1789. The second thing, and I think this is it's a challenging thing to figure this out, but I do think that I understand in DC, you have to play for a team, like there's the red team and the blue team, like you're on one side. And so there's always, if you're going to win elections, like there's a partisan nature to that. But I do think if you're looking at just great leaders generally, they really do have a vision for the flourishing of the whole regime, And so there's a way that even though maybe their politics might be slightly more representative of one side or another, there really is this kind of this transcendent effort to rise above these factions and sort of, and I think great leaders like throughout American history, like have done this.
Yeah. So it's their scope is not limited to winning a primary in one party. It's to transcend and like arrive at super majoritarian politics essentially. This is why the FDR example is so interesting. It is, again, if not to force the president of ISI to say nice things about FDR, but it's like if we're talking about statesmanship as a practical ability, like he maxed out on it. Like he transcended the ordinary like four corners of partisan politics and basically could have ruled as long as he wanted to.
Yeah. In one sense, I think their vision is too idealistic and not realist enough. But in another sense, I think their vision is too small, right, about what can be accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't read, but for you and for our listeners, Conrad Black, listener of Moment of Truth, he will love hearing this, has a great biography. He's a conservative Canadian of FDR. And it's called, I think it's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Champion of Freedom. And he basically makes that the exact argument that you were making is that it was for the betterment of the whole nation. He wasn't trying to secure necessarily hegemony for like Democrats. He was very particularly concerned with the betterment of the nation. I don't agree with like everything that he says in the book, but very interesting, very good read. It's like 1,300 pages, so it might take you some time.
Yeah, and I think on that point, real quick, I think we especially as intellectuals and as conservatives, like I think we're just like this to the statesman, like all this is happening like in real time. Things are coming so fast, so it's like. If I were to say like, all right, if you just get these challenges, Great Depression lobbed at you here, World War II and Hitler like lobbed at you there.
Yeah.
Like, how do you generally like? How do you do? Like,
you're not going to tell them to go read some Cicero.
Yeah. If a person can like generally successfully navigate a country through those two massive crises, like I'm willing to forgive a lot of other faults. You know.
So that's interesting then. So is statesmanship something that it can't really be taught? It can only be studied upon occurring?
No, I think so the reason that I love the Mirrors for Princes tradition and the reason I put together this book is like, it is not a theoretical book. This is a manual, for an embattled statesman. Very practical. It connects the whole world of theory to action. So like any contemporary political leader or aspiring one can open this up, and there are concrete nuggets of wisdom and applications that both play to their self-interest, but also to hopefully, other good and classical virtues.
Is Donald Trump a statesman?
Is he a statesman? I mean, I think he's someone who has simultaneously extraordinary virtues and extraordinary vices. And that's not uncommon, sort of, as you look at these statesmen in certain traits, they're off the charts. You think of like his general like political instincts on issues like China or immigration or trade or Middle East wars, whatever. And his gut instinct is really high. But at the same time, there are other vices, right? And I think the personnel aspect is one. I think, like flattery, succumbing, there are massive warnings about flattery, like in this whole tradition. Constantly, like, beware of the flatterer. And the reason is like flattery actually is really, really effective. Like if you're going to try to persuade people, like flattery or elements of flattery is like one of the most effective ways to do it. And so I think on that point, I think it's a pride thing. The flattery, can kind of lead to bad personnel choices. And then all of a sudden you get people around you who are not allowing someone like him to lean into their strengths, but they're also like trying to maximize his vices, because those, the more you maximize those, you can actually exert power over him.
So, is he a great statesman?
Is he a great statesman? I think I would wait for his. I think if you're looking at it, let's say objectively, I think you need, someone like him, would need another term, and I think there needs to be distance
to be able to evaluate.
Okay.
All right.
Who is the most underrated statesman that you found that you're like convinced this is like platonic ideal of the kind of thing that we're talking about?
Oh man. So I really like Thomas More as a statesman. And there's a reason for it. I like to think of Thomas More as a Catholic Machiavelli. So he has this, I know we're probably running short on time, but there's this very short dialogue between him and this wayfaring intellectual named Raphael. And he says, Raphael, you should, get in the Council of Princes, get your hands dirty in politics. And Raphael says like, oh no, like a king will just soil my good ideas. Like I'm too good for politics. Yeah. And More basically like slaps him on the face and says, you fool, like, the reason that our regime is in such a poor state is because philosophers will not condescend to offer their counsel to kings. And then he gives some very practical, realist advice for how you can't abandon the ship in the storm because you can't control the winds. You have to be very artful and sort of, live within the tension of this imperfect world. So I actually think Thomas More has amazing advice for statesmen today.
I'm going to once again take the inverse. Who is the most overrated statesman?
No, I was going to save that for the subscribers only. We're going to get. We'll get to that.
All right.
These are the toughest interview questions.
Yeah, no softballs here. No softballs.
Not a softball. No. We're going to save that for later. Before we close to our subscribers only section, though, I want to talk a little bit about you've been in this position at ISI for a couple of years now. handicap the modern college campus for me. I'm sure it's pretty bad, but maybe put some meat on the bones. What's wrong with our colleges and universities?
Well, where to begin? I mean, I think this year we actually had a turning point, which is a first in ISI's 70-year history, where for years, conservatives have been complaining about the radicalism in college campuses. And I think some people paid attention, but by and large, they thought, it's just a few sort of loony professors, but it works, generally speaking. And I think the whole Harvard controversy with Claudine Gay really, lifted the veil, showed the emperor has no clothes, not just for conservatives, but for sort of normies everywhere. They all of a sudden they see that a lot of this is fake. A lot of people are getting rich off this system. It's a credentialing system, a networking system, but it's not really doing the work of education. Now at ISI, I actually think right now we're probably seeing, in terms of the students that are engaged with us, even compared to 10 years ago, like they are more conservative than ever before. They're more religious than ever before. They grew up in to borrow a phrase from one of our friends, Aaron Wren, a negative world. And that's very different than growing up in a neutral world. And so I think they're more courageous and they're more hungry to learn the things they're not getting in the classroom. So in one sense, it is true that the students that are coming to ISI, there's a divide. Some of them, if you're just going to, let's say, an Ivy League school, or if you're at top state schools, they know less than previous students in different eras because they just simply have never read. Like they don't even have a core curriculum in many of these schools. So they don't know the great texts, the great ideas. So you have to basically start from the basics. But then you have another cohort of students that came through classical schools or schools like Hillsdale or Grove City that have a foundation that is light years ahead of where students would have been 30 years ago. But in both cases, I think the quality of the students that we're dealing with is much higher than before. For our honors program, we had we only accept 50 applicants. It's our flagship program. Right now, we have over 400 requests for applications for that program. So, it's highly selective, and I've been very impressed with the students.
I'm curious, because the sort of meme of, these college campuses are going crazy is so prevalent. I imagine there's a lot of what, from your vantage point, can look like sloppy thinking about the problem. What's the meme or phrase or concept that you see bandied about in conservative or even just centrist circles that frustrates you, that you think misses the ball when it comes to the problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
I'll throw one out there potentially. Yeah, sure. Colleges should be neutral. Yeah, should they?
I think neutrality is impossible. Yeah. Right. But I would kind of put a caveat to that. I do think different institutions probably, if you're looking at what's sort of realistic and and what would be the most holistic, I think certain. That's not to say that every college, I think, ought to be a Hillsdale College, right? I think you would, if you have a flagship state school, it's just part of the fundamental nature of America as it is today, that you will have, even a healthy version, or let's say the best version of the University of Michigan, for example, is probably going to have more intellectual diversity, probably be closer to what we would think of as neutrality, if we could sort of engineer it however we wanted, than a Hillsdale College. Because obviously a school like Hillsdale, or religious colleges in particular, like some of them even have, you actually have to be, a member of a particular church, and you participate in church discipline, and the whole life of the college is really shaped around the liturgical activities of that particular faith tradition. So I don't think you can expect that to really happen unless there's some, a massive great awakening like at state school. So in one sense, I think neutrality is a myth, because you're never going to, because, things are always pointed towards a particular end, they're never fully neutral. But on the other side of things, I think, I would accept, I could concede sort of neutrality as a goal for a lot of these larger state institutions. And I think we would be better off if we work towards that.
How is ISI trying to change the culture in American education? Practically speaking, what does it do? A lot of our listeners are familiar with you guys, but some might not be.
Yeah. So we do, I think, three things. So one, we're we're filling in the education that students aren't getting in the classroom. So that sort of very practically means, we're taking Western civilization sort of broadly, right, telling a story of America's roots going all the way back to Jerusalem, Athens, Rome, London, Philadelphia. We're giving them that narrative arc to understand our own American order. And we're also, we've actually distilled what we call 110 concepts for ordered liberty. And these are in each category, from political philosophy to economics to technology and human dignity. And we're really focused on centralizing our curriculum so that students can understand those concepts, in a serious way. The second thing that we're doing is we're building a counter-revolutionary, counter-cultural network. So part of the reason that the Ivy Leagues still have appeal today is because you enter this whole career network and you're basically, set for life in terms of your job, your social status, et cetera. And so we're building an alternative for that, for conservative students. And I think we're one of the only institutions that can actually, go campus by campus. And we could say, like, we literally know who the smartest, most ambitious, most courageous conservatives are, not only at Harvard and Yale, but also at Stanford, at Michigan, at University of Texas, and at Hillsdale and at Grove City. And we can actually bring these people in a room and kind of cross-pollinate these worlds that don't intersect to hopefully build that leadership class that can rival, what you would get at a larger scale with the Ivy Leagues.
Yeah. What do you think has changed about the kind of things ISI has to do? Because it's been around for almost 60 years now. Right?
Yeah, 70.
70 years now. What has changed since its inception, and how do you guys think institutionally about what it means to tailor an organization like that's mission over time? Sure.
Well, I mean, one very obvious thing is when it was founded, it was the kind of the height of the Cold War. I mean, it was founded as the Intercollegiate Society of Individualists, right? and it was founded to counter the Intercollegiate Society of Socialists, right? And so they actually had a publication called the Freeman, that was published by fee, that was sent out to all the ISI students. And one of these copies made it to Russell Kirk, and he basically read through this. And he said that it shocked his conscience. He said that he would never even call himself an individual. He hopes he's a person. And he sort of wrote this scathing letter to ISI saying, like, get rid of Locke, get rid of all these sort of classical liberal thinkers. Like, he was like, you have to capture students' imagination. Like, that's what you have to do. Like, have them read Dante, have them read Homer, like Virgil. Like, it has to be an exercise in imagination, not just like an update in terms of like whatever classical liberal thought. And so ISI over the years then has made an effort, even consciously, at the board level, pretty early in response to Kirk's feedback, of sort of like amending their curriculum to sort of bring in these more sort of Christian humanist kind of voices. So I think that's one example. It was, and I think the other challenge is that at the time, I do think there was a hope that we can actually turn the university system around. Like, we can win this, and I think now, I would say that by and large, like the elite university, like it's unwinnable. It's basically a hedge fund with, that supports some, highly ideological faculty members, and it's a credentialing, network and tool, but it's really doesn't have anything to do with education. And I think the incentives are so entrenched in the wrong directions that you're never going to save Harvard University. But that doesn't mean, for example, at a school like University of Pittsburgh, we had a debate on transgenderism there last year that had, there was basically mass protest, explosive device.
I watched it live. It was crazy.
Live, right? Yeah. FBI arrested several of the protesters who set off it was one of the worst and even scariest sort of moments, like in my own life, right? Being there. Now, the tune has sort of changed. I mean, we went after the university pretty hard. We worked with Alliance Defending Freedom afterwards. And basically, our campus group there grew like fourfold since that incident. They fired and replaced. I don't know if they fired. The head of police on campus was either retired or was fired and has been replaced. Is super supportive of our group on campus. the administration, released kind of a token statement saying like, we believe in free speech and free expression. And like, I didn't really take that too seriously, but now their tune has totally changed with our group. Like, they're friendly to the group. They say you'll never have to pay any security fees for events. So those things are, it's not a permanent victory, but it does show like you can push an issue, and then afterwards, you can actually kind of fight hard on it, and you can actually come to a new settlement that actually, our group is four times stronger than they were last year. And they're able to operate a lot more freely at the university than they were. Things are better now than they were a year ago. It's like, those are the victories that I think are possible.
All right. Well, we're going to have a couple more questions for you, some silly, but also we're going to ask who the most overrated statesman is. That is exclusively for our subscribers on YouTube. There's 2 tiers, very apt for this conversation. There's truthers and there's statesmen. And so you can go and subscribe on YouTube to get the exclusive, 10 to 20 minutes we do with each of our guests. This is something new we're trying for season 4. So if you'd like to support the podcast, I know many of you listen to it religiously every week it comes out. Kick in a couple bucks, help subsidize it. We put on all these fancy cameras and spend a lot on editing. And so that is a way that you can support the podcast. So we'll go now to our subscribers only section. We're grateful, as always, this week to bring you this episode in partnership with Upward.News. Upward.News is a fantastic political news website run by our friend Ari. Their daily brief brings you need-to-know news and insights that you won't find in the mainstream media. They've put out fantastic content on Instagram, on Twitter, and many other platforms. Sign up for their newsletters at Upward.News. Even with political insiders, many of whom listen to this show, it's helpful to have people who can collate the most important news items happening across the world every single week. And Ari does that with his various newsletters at Upward.News. Once again, that's Upward.News. Thank you so much for helping bring Moment of Truth to our audience. Johnny, where can people keep up with everything that you are doing? Where can they buy the book, and how can they keep up with Intercollegiate Studies Institute?
Sure. So first, I'd say, go to isi.org and follow ISI on Twitter.
Yeah.
Clean domain. Secondly, you can buy the book on Amazon. Right now, it is the #1 new release in the ancient and classical category. So Please help to boost those ratings. And then you can follow me on X at Johnny Burtka.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. We certainly enjoyed taping it. Once again, remember, you can sign up for AM Fridays, our spring lecture series on Capitol Hill in the Russell Senate Office Building at americanmoment.org/AM Fridays. Does that work? Fantastic.
Yeah, it does.
Sign up for the Gala for American Statecraft at statecraftgala.org. We'll have David O. Sachs getting the Third Rail Award for Public Courage. He's a member of the PayPal Mafia, venture capitalist, brilliant commentator on public life as well, and Senator J.D. Vance. Be sure to sign up for our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube. Become a member, a truther or a statesman, and be sure to rate and review this podcast as well. We have plenty of awesome stuff coming for the rest of the season. This year is a crazy one at American Moment, and we're grateful to you guys as always for joining us for the ride. We'll see you next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is americanmoment.org.